Screen, thumbs up. Okay. Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to our 8th task force meeting. I feel like we start a lot of these meetings this year with sort of some acknowledgements of what we're all experiencing. And right now we are all experiencing the choking smoke of these wildfires. So I just want to let you know on behalf of the staff and strategy team that our hearts and our thoughts are with you and the others affected by the fires. We really appreciate you being here with us tonight and taking some time and precious energy to have this conversation. So thank you so much. And as always, let us know if there's anything we can do to support you. We are going to get kicked off with some of our typical top of meeting housekeeping items. First, just a quick Zoom reminder. General guidelines. We're still in that meeting format where we all have a little bit more control, which is great. But so we ask that when you're not speaking, try to remember to mute yourself. Hold questions and comments for those designated times, and there's a lot of them tonight. You can always use the raise your hand feature when you'd like to get in the queue for a question, and that's found in the participants tab. And we do have some audience members joining us tonight. It's great to have you. We do ask that you mute yourself and turn your video off if you don't mind, except during those public comment opportunities, just so the task force can see each other. And feel free to use the chat if things come up, but we'll try to keep that as open as possible for technical troubleshooting questions. So our plan for this evening, we will do the kind of welcome and housekeeping things that we're doing. And then we are diving into our second of 5 pricing typologies tonight, and that is freeway tolling or highway tolling. And we have some great guest speakers tonight that I'll introduce in just a second. They're going to help us kind of cover what is tolling and why might cities implement it. Start to look at the equity considerations of highway tolling. And then Shoshana will walk us through some of the city's stated positions and hypotheses around highway tolling, what's already been communicated to date, and what's kind of our starting place for getting task force input and feedback. And then at 7, if not before, we will break into small groups. And sort of like we did with parking, we will take our equitable mobility framework and we will really walk through that in small groups and sort of look at tolling from all those different angles and have a really robust discussion before we come back, do a quick little debrief. And then as we've kind of done in some previous meetings, we're going to take a quick poll so that we can see where folks are falling on a couple questions. It's not a recommendation moment. It's really just a temperature taking opportunity. After 2 hours of talking about a topic, how are we feeling about some questions? So before I go any further, we sent out a link to the meeting number 7 summary from last meeting. Any questions, comments, or concerns about that before we call it final? Raise your hand if you'd like. All right, not seeing any, we'll call that good. And do we have any members of the public with us this evening that would like to make a public comment? If so, please use the raise your hand function, which can be found in the participants tab. All right, I'm not seeing any. So, oh, I don't think am I seeing any, Mariana?
I'm not seeing any.
I see in the chat, it looks like Corey would like to make a comment.
Great.
And she's
yes.
Thank you,
Go
Hi,
ahead,
Corey. Yes, we would love to give you some space to make a public comment. And sorry, I'll try to figure out exactly where the raised hand function is. But if you want to go ahead and turn your video on if you're comfortable and unmute, you have a couple minutes to address the task force.
Awesome. So hi, I'm Corey, pronoun she, they, and I know my little screen says VICAS planning and I am a transportation planner, but honestly, I'm still figuring out a lot about Zoom and I haven't figured out how to change that yet. I am representing as a citizen of Eugene, but often making trips to Portland for work and family reasons today. Last meeting, I just wanted to reiterate task force members' comments around how the public comments are being handled and categorized. There was a concerning comment made last meeting in terms that the public input comments were sent to the task force about an hour before the meeting. And I just find that a little hard to be able to truly digest that information in just an hour. So just making sure that the task force gets that information at least a day beforehand, because I know a lot of these people are volunteering their times and we want to be respectful of their times as well as the public, and then your time as the public organization. And then I read the tolling memo for today, and there was a specific question I had and concern, and I'm going to quote the actual quote. It states, ODOT is proceeding with the environmental review process for these projects, leading with the I-205 project. The stated purpose for these projects is to manage congestion and generate revenue for congestion relief. The I-205 toll project is specifically tied to a proposal to add lanes to the highway in the section near or on the Abernethy Bridge. And I am concerned about this because we know from many studies that adding highways or adding lanes to a highway is a short-term congestion relief and is very inequitable and has disproportionate effects on low income and communities of color. Also, I know recently that the Rose Quarter Freeway Expansion Project lost some major support within the past few weeks. I know a council member has withdrawn her support for that. And the success of these tolling projects isn't so much about highway expansion, but having really strong public transit. And one of the things that attracted me to the state and to go into transportation planning is because of how innovative Portland is. So, and then lastly, and David will say this later on, but public support for these projects is key. So if we go ahead with the highway expansion, I just don't realistically see how this project is going to move forward. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much for being with us, Corey, and we really appreciate your comments. We will absolutely look at our public comment protocols and figure out exactly. I can't remember the comment that we sent out last time, but we'll go back and look at that, and we can change the protocol so that we make sure that comments get out with definite advance notice for our task force members to review. So I really appreciate that feedback, and thanks for your other comments. Any questions for Corey before we move on? Okay, well, we'll continue going. And just to note, we did not receive any written comments before this meeting in between our last one and this one. So before I turn it over to our presenters, I'm just going to run through a few quick project updates, just kind of things that have changed or new items in between this meeting and last meeting. But first, I want to introduce three guests that we're going to have with us this evening. The first is Ray Delahanty, who is our project manager with the firm WSP. He's the project manager on our consultant team. And while this is the first time we're formally introducing Ray, that's our bad, because Ray has actually been at every single one of our task force meetings and has been supporting the POEM team behind the scenes for months. So we are really excited to formally introduce you to him to you and you to him this evening, and he will be joining some of our breakout groups this afternoon, so you'll get a chance to speak with him then as well. The second guest is David Ungama, who is a Vice President and Director of Transportation at WSP. He has also, like Ray, has decades of experience in transportation planning and specifically over 25 years of expertise with tolling. David kindly pre-recorded a really comprehensive and thorough pre-presentation about tolling that we sent out in advance to try to preserve as much time for discussion in this meeting. So if you haven't watched that, we really encourage you to do so. And David is also going to be here to answer any questions you have about the nuts and bolts, and will also be participating in the breakout groups if you have any specific questions. And then finally, I would like to introduce Chris Lepe. Chris recently started his own firm, Mariposa Planning Solutions, but was previously the Regional Policy Director for Transform, a nonprofit organization based in the Bay Area. And several of our task force members, I think, have shared the Transform pricing and equity report at previous meetings. So it's great to have Chris with us tonight. He has over 15 years of experience leading campaigns, initiatives, and coalitions around transportation, land use, and housing issues. And he's going to speak with us tonight a little bit about tolling and equity. So thank you so much, Ray, David, and Chris, for being with us. A few quick updates. One, we will share more information about this via email, but wanted to give a verbal kind of heads up that it's coming. Our neighbors to the north, Seattle, are also undertaking a project to look at congestion pricing or pricing for equitable mobility right now. And we've received an invitation from a couple of their community advisory committees to connect with people in Portland, specifically connect with community members in Portland to discuss our process and to discuss kind of why, if and why having a conversation around pricing and equity is worthwhile. And we would really love to offer that opportunity for task force members to connect with that group. So we're still figuring out the nuts and bolts of like exactly when and how they're gonna convene that. But we'll follow up via email with more information, and totally voluntary. Don't feel like you need to do it, but if you're interested, we'll give you a chance to kind of raise your hand via email and let us know. We also last month talked a little bit about another invitation. You guys are a very popular group from Metro to engage you on informing some equity indicators for their congestion pricing study. Again, we're kind of waiting for some details on exactly when that's going to be, but we'll follow up when we have more information. And then finally, we've kind of been giving you little updates along the way about ODOT's tolling projects. We're going to talk a lot about the ODOT specific projects next month, but we did want to let you know that the I-205 public comment period is ongoing. It was intended to wrap up on Wednesday, and it has been extended to September 23rd. And we sent out the link to that to that comment period, and we can do so again. And then finally, I just want to say, we're switching gears to tolling briefly, but we haven't forgotten about parking. Our plan is to really process the input you gave us, do further analysis to the extent possible on the questions that were raised, and then come back in 2021 to start refining recommendations about that, about tolling, and about commercial services and right-of-way, which is going to be our next typology. But so don't think that because we're not talking parking tonight, it has gone poof. There's a lot of work happening behind the scenes. Any questions on any of these updates before we move ahead? Okay, then I'm going to turn it over to Shoshana.
Good evening, everyone. Nice to see everyone a little bit virtually again. And even though Emma just said this, I just also want to, really thank you all for being here. I think we do want to acknowledge, I think we do have a little bit of a smaller group tonight, it looks like. And I know this is, we continue to be in very challenging times right now, and appreciate all of you who were able to show up and be here with us. And also just want to acknowledge how many other things are going on, and how hard it may be to show up and concentrate on things like this right now. This work still feels very urgent because, and what is the latest events with smoke, help to make the case that it's urgent, and also know there are like really immediate other urgent things that people are dealing with. So, and to the fact that we have a little bit of a smaller group, this is one conversation of a few that we'll be having about tolling, and so we'll be able to continue the conversation and hopefully bring everyone along with us. So as Emma said, we're moving. We spent a couple months on parking. We're going to talk about tolling starting tonight, again next month, and actually again after that. Then we'll be talking about commercial motor vehicle fleets and right-of-way access, and then moving sort of later to some longer-term pricing policies like cordons and congestion zones and road usage charge or vehicle miles traveled based charges. So it's just sort of where we are in our different typologies. Next slide. And so, why are we talking about highway tolling right now, and how is it really different? And the truth is there's a lot of the considerations for highway tolling that are similar, even similar to some of the considerations we talked about with parking. They will be similar to things we talk about with cordons and things like that. And yet there's also some distinctions and some reasons that it feels like it's important to talk about these somewhat separately. And so highway tolls really refer to sort of direct fees charged for the use of highway facilities, whether it's a stretch, a corridor of a highway, a bridge along a highway, or a particular lane on a highway, whereas area-based charges, which may also be collected sort of through a toll on a particular road, but they're about charging either to enter an area or to drive through an area. And you can see in the middle two maps, one is a corridor highway toll, and one is a charge to enter into an area and drive around in an area. And then the other reason that we're talking about this one and sort of moving this one up in our typology is because of the very active regional conversation that's happening right now around tolling, and specifically around tolling on I-5 and I-205. And it is worth noting that we're having this conversation. We want to have this conversation. We hope to get some really substantive feedback from you all. And yet the city of Portland doesn't control the highways, and ODOT is having this whole other regional conversation about tolling. So we're hoping to have this conversation with you all and sort of talk about how the city has thought about the policy implications of tolling and how we've thought so far about what makes sense to advocate for around tolling, get some additional feedback from you all, and hope to have that continue to inform how we and how the city and hopefully even city council continues to show up in these other broad regional conversations. But again, do want to acknowledge there's a whole other set of stakeholders. There's a whole other complete process happening. So we're having one conversation, and we think that it's important, and we think the city has a really important voice in this, but we also don't control it. So trying to make sure everyone understands that distinction. And then the last thing, sort of going back to something Emma noted, the I-205 project does have this comment period that is now extended for one more week. The city, as I'll talk about a little bit later, we have been sort of weighing in on a number of things to date with some sort of principles and hypotheses, which we'll share. We do have some feedback specifically on that. Again, sort of using the principles we have set in stone so far. Again, after we have our more detailed conversations, maybe things will change, but have been relying on some principles so far. So we'll share, we will be sure to send out the letter that we are sending to ODOT for this first stage so far. And we'll also I think we have sent before to you all some letters that we've shared in previous parts of the process, and we can resend those all before our next meeting, just to sort of keep you all in the loop on comments to date. I think that's this one. So why might cities implement tolling? And here, actually, so I want to acknowledge again, Emma introduced David Angama, who's with us, and I'm going to do sort of a really short version of the video that we sent out ahead of time. And I just sort of curious, especially as we think about what works and what doesn't, maybe people can raise their hand if you had a chance to watch the video. We're trying to see if this works. If you had a chance to either watch the video and or at least skim the memo and have some sense, it would be great to have a sense. Can folks either raise their virtual hand or their real hand or something if you had a chance to watch those? And again, I know this was a busy week and we sent it out during a hard week, but does that, now I can't tell if I'm seeing. Is that working? Can you guys see?
Yeah, I think I've captured it.
Okay.
Okay,
I guess I can't. I'm not a host. Okay, so hopefully some of you had a chance to watch that, and if not, there's still time. There's more of a more robust overview that we sent out ahead of time and in this tolling memo. So I'm just going to do the quickest overview version, and then David will be available to answer questions both on these slides and the larger overview. But so why do cities or states implement tolling? The first reason is really about raising revenue to recoup costs for road construction or for maintenance. This is becoming increasingly important as gas tax revenues continue to decline. Some local examples of this are Bridge of the Gods in Cascade Locks and the Tacoma Narrows Bridge. And then the second reason is also to use tolling to send price signals to manage for the demand for the space and to hopefully reduce overconsumption of the space, and then really encourage people to make different choices and use existing facilities as efficiently as possible. And here, local examples are the SR 520 bridge in Seattle and the I-405 express lanes in Seattle. Although really those two examples are sort of examples of both. They had some revenue raising components and some managing for demand components. So, which is something that can happen as well. It doesn't have to be one or the other. And as I'll discuss again a little bit more later, the city to date has been really consistent in saying that the reason that we'd like to see tolling move forward is really about managing for demand. Not to say there aren't needs to raise revenue, but we think that this is the tool that is most promising for using our existing facilities as efficiently as possible to prevent or at least reduce the need for further costly and what we see as often inequitable expansion of freeways. So we're definitely more focused on the latter, but those are the two high-level reasons. And then even more, there are a couple of additional types of tolling. First, there are tolled lanes where only one or a couple of the lanes on a highway are priced, and this provides a lane-based choice, so you can choose to pay and go in that lane, or you could choose to not pay and go in the freer lanes. This is, probably many of you have experienced this other places, so we want to acknowledge it. We also want to acknowledge that this was looked at in the earlier phases of the ODOT work on I-5 and I-205 on their feasibility analysis portion, and really found that it's not very feasible in the Portland region. Many of our facilities are only 2 lanes, and that's just not enough choice unless we were to also accompany it with expansion. So while it's a tool that is out there, it's not really a tool that's on the table right here, right now. And so then there's tolled roadways where all of the lanes on the highway are priced. And here, if you, it's more of a route-based choice, and it can be a choice either to just take a different route, take a different roadway to get somewhere. It can also be a choice about taking a different mode to get somewhere, perhaps going at a different time. And there are a lot of examples of tolled roadways around the country. Many of them are simply just tolls, not variable rate, flat rate, about raising revenue. And then there are some examples of variable roadway pricing around the country as well, though much more limited. And I think the next slide has, so this shows the limited examples of variable price tolling facilities in the United States right now. And there's tolled tunnels and tolled bridges and tolled just roadways. It's important to note that many of these were places where there were tolled lanes, and then there were flat rate tolled lanes, and then they were converted to variable price lanes. In Portland, or with Oregon, with ODOT right now, there's a consideration of tolling on I-5. And if we were to take the fully unmanaged, unpriced facility on I-5 and turn it into a variable price facility, that would probably be the first of its kind in the United States. That wasn't also building something that wasn't already tolled or wasn't a high occupancy vehicle lane. And that speaks both to sort of how hard it could be to take an unpriced and unmanaged lane and price it purely to manage demand and reduce congestion. And in addition to how hard it could be, sort of how potentially groundbreaking we could be in really using a tool to manage the system more efficiently. Again, if there are ways, if we and ODOT and other stakeholders are able to figure out how to do it in a way that really advances the congestion management goals and also works from an equity perspective and a climate perspective. So hard to do and potentially an exciting challenge, I guess. And then on the side, you'll see there's just some, the reason that this is a tool that people are looking at to manage demand is because there is evidence that it works. For SR 520 in Seattle, after things evened out a bit, they saw about a 30% drop in traffic volumes, as well as an 8% mode shift to transit. Also important to note that they see that 25% of daily commuters shifted to driving parallel routes. So some of that traffic volume is really just going somewhere else. And that's a super important consideration, and also maybe speaks to what other options that are not driving are available. And then in Maryland, some other things that they found with a facility that was really built as a toll facility was a 70% time savings compared to other local roads. And then one of the benefits was providing an express lane that transit could use. So there's evidence of demand management. There could be evidence of transit benefit if transit gets a route, but also lots of things to keep an eye out for, like are people just shifting to another road. And then here are just some other sort of very high level things that have been learned from folks using tolling around the country for demand management. And these were in all of this was in David's presentation as well, but sort of some higher level lessons learned. Opposition is usually tied to fairness and to equity and to privacy and trust concerns. Public opinion is very mixed. It usually lowest before opening, but tends to increase afterwards and people begin to experience benefits. And I know this is something that has been seen also with other things like cordons and congestion zones in other places. No one likes the idea before it's implemented, and then sometimes it's more favorable afterwards if benefits are seen. Decision makers really have to be champions. Choice and options are key. If we're going to make it more expensive to take some routes, then there have to be alternatives. And then clarity around how revenue will be used really matters, and simple messaging around this is also super important. And then of course, and we'll talk much more about this, but lots of design considerations when you're thinking about creating a program. Who is actually paying, how much are they paying is obviously a super important question. What is the technology that will be used? Are you talking about time of day where it's just more during peak hours and less at night or something, or is it truly dynamic and responsive to the congestion on the roadway? What are the complementary traffic management strategies? And again, how is revenue invested? So I think, again, that was the, I'm not sure what that was, 7-minute version or something of tolling. Hopefully a fair amount of you watched the complementary materials or will have a chance to. But we'll pause here before Chris is going to be invited up and talk a little bit about specifically narrowing in on equity. But now I'd also like to invite David to sort of join me if anyone has some of the higher level questions before we move on.
Looks like I see Sharifa's hand up. Sharifa, go for it.
Yeah, I was just wondering if we can ask questions about the memo you sent out, or should that wait till after the presentations?
Nope, go for it.
Well, I guess one thing that really I was very curious about is the constitutional restriction on revenue being used for expanding transit. And so this was news to me, and this is clearly something that's been kind of, I think as someone that's a transit user, everyone's like, oh, but we'll use it for transit. And so I'm feeling a little disillusioned here, and I'm wondering what it would take to is it a matter of it going through the courts to determine whether it's allowed or not, or is it a matter of a constitutional change? And at any point, can I get an answer to that?
I'll start, I guess. So a super important question, and also sort of super complicated. So I'll start. So Oregon has this constitutional restriction, and it is open into interpretation. There are parts of it that have been challenged, and a lot of it has not been challenged. The current, I think I would say, sort of operating understanding for a lot of folks is that you can use it, you can use it in the right of way. So you could use it to do things like creating bus lanes in the right of way, or signal improvements for buses, or things related to transit that are in the right of way. But you could not use it for transit operations. That said, there a lot of it hasn't been tested, and so it is, I don't think that everyone is in agreement on exactly what it means. But so there are a few paths forward. There are, continued potentially legal work on it, to completely change it would be a constitutional change, taking a vote. I think also, as we have this conversation, we are super interested still in everyone's feedback on, would, whether it's for tolling or whether it's for some other piece. And again, there may also be different answers for tolling than for accordion and stuff. There's a whole sort of suite of possibilities, and a lot of it is dependent on different interpretations of the law. But I think our perspective has been, we want to talk about all this, and we also want to get your collectively the task force feedback on what would be necessary, from your perspective, to make it, to make tolling or to make some other form of pricing possible, and then figure out if it is something that can be done, and if not, maybe the recommendation is this, would some part of this would need to change before we would recommend it. I mean, I think all of that whole sort of suite of things is on the table, but it's a little bit, there's sort of a lot of considerations. That was a long answer, but that's the start, at least.
Thank you.
Great question. Aaron, I see your hand next.
Yeah, just to follow up from Sharifa's, do any other cities have similar laws on the books regarding the use of funds that way? Like, is this something that's unique to Portland?
It is somewhat unique to the state of Oregon. I'm not
Oregon, excuse me.
So yeah, it's a state law, it's a state restriction. I believe that we are somewhat unique. I know there's a lot that don't. I may ask if David has any other.
Sure. Yeah. So it is a fairly unique component when it comes to tolling, at least to the extent that Oregon is of the opinion of that toll revenue could be designated for transit operations. It should be noted that most toll facilities have the dedication of the revenue towards the corridor in which it's been raised. And more specifically, they're often utilized in the context of paying back the bonds and or other costs of capital expansion for those facilities. So what makes the Portland region a little different is that it's already actively considering the use of tolling on existing facilities. And so the question of where the revenue goes and potentially to transit operations is one that other states really haven't had to address. Now, that being the case, most other states have incorporated some element, at least within the past 20 years, of their tolling plans with complementary transit investments. And as Shoshana had mentioned, there are the possibilities for transit capital investments, which can be very, very beneficial for transit riders within the price corridors. So for example, in Los Angeles, if you were to drive the 110 corridor south of downtown LA, you would see transit stations in the middle of the roadway itself. Same with 35W corridor in Minneapolis. Those are examples of trying to provide a higher class of service for transit riders. And from what I've come to understand about the Oregon constitutional restriction, those types of capital investments could be part of the possibility.
These are really, really good questions. And I think as the memo sort of stated, there's some interpretation questions about, like, is a toll a tax? Is a toll not a tax? What a corridor means in terms of where to put that revenue. But to Shoshana's point, what we'd really like to do too is not stifle the conversation too much, because we really want to hear kind of what would it take to make this work against our definition of equitable mobility. And that's going to be really informative then as we get to what recommendations might be around next steps. And again, the role the city plays unique in these conversations, given that we are not the highway authority ourselves. 80, I see your hand next.
Yeah, I just feel like I missed a key part of the presentation. You said something that a certain type of tolling on I-5 would be the first in the nation to be pulled off. And I was just wondering what type of tolling exactly seems like it's possible for that to happen.
Well, nothing's impossible. But so we would be most tolling, most tolling right now is about like a flat rate tolling to raise revenue. Then there are some other places that have variable rate tolling that is more about managing demand. Many of those started as flat rate tolls and then transitioned. There are other places like in, the 520, the Seattle corridor, that did move a corridor to variable rate. They also built a bridge in this at the same time. And, it's more common to build something and to pay for it. Or there are other places where there have been lanes that were managed as high occupancy vehicle lanes or carpool lanes, and then those were transitioned into tolled lanes. But to just take a freeway right now that doesn't have any tolls, it doesn't have that, we have a very small chunk of I-5 that is HOV, but is largely unmanaged entirely. And to transition that into a managing for demand, sort of pricing, tolling kind of a system is not something that has been done before. So again, nothing's impossible, and that's the conversation that we're having. But it is, I think, in the lessons learned, and I'm sure David could say this more, but people are more inclined, I think, to be okay with tolling to pay for something. So if you're building something and raising revenue, I think by and large, folks feel like the public can understand that. Whereas something that is existing and is free, and then saying suddenly now you have to pay to drive on there is can often be seen as a harder thing from the public's point of view.
I see. Thanks. Can I ask a quick follow-up too? Mm-hmm. Just as you mentioned, the fact that we are not an ODOT committee, and ODOT's recent record with committees has been a little bit problematic, and the fact that ODOT doesn't even have currently city support for the projects that it's pursuing. Just what actual potential is there for this group to influence anything that happens at ODOT?
Well, so breaking apart, there's the I-5 improvement project, and then there's the I-5 tolling project. And ODOT has been talking about those as separate projects. I think as far as the tolling and the way they set that up, there are a lot of stakeholders again, and the city is not the tolling authority. That said, I think the city does have a strong voice in that process. I think that they are running a lot of the sort of feedback of that process through regional bodies, like through JPAC and through the ACT, the Region 1 ACT, which is their Area Commission on Transportation. Ultimately, the Oregon Transportation Commission, the sort of statewide ODOT governing body, has ultimate authority. But the city, in many ways, has been one of the champions of tolling, because we do see the potential to manage our system better. So, and again, this is sort of exactly what we want to talk with you all, because I think to date, the city has seen it as having the potential to manage the system more efficiently and be good from congestion and climate. And we think there are potential for equity. If we come out of this conversation with you all with a strong sort of endorsement of, yes, it could be, and here's how we think so, I think that positions, our hope, just being, is we would bring that to city council, and that positions city council in continuing to show up really strongly in those regional conversations. Then, whereas, and again, I also want to be really careful that there's lots of other voices, and this is not the only committee, but we do know city council has endorsed this committee. We set this up when they asked us to, and they're interested in the feedback. And so I think, it will be about the city using their voice in various ODOT processes, but we think that the city has a pretty powerful voice. So
okay, thank you.
Thanks, everyone. I see Stephanie's hand. I'm going to take her question, and then I'm going to move us along so that we can keep going through the presentations and get to discussion.
Thank you very much. I have a bridge question. We have people coming into the center city at rush hour who go over the Burnside Bridge and the Selwood Bridge. And, it's not just the freeways. that are bringing people into the center city. How about in high-tech tolling there, where you track the license plates that are coming in at rush hour and you send a bill?
That's a good question. You know, I think that we have been thinking that we might talk sort of more specifically about things like that when we talk about cordons, that, you know, if there was a sort of a ring of some sort around the central city, I mean, there's several ways that it could be done. One way, excuse me, probably the easiest way would be something coming over the bridges. That's not our entire central city. So there's pros and cons of that. But yeah, certainly, using something across the bridges is another way that we could do something, especially if we wanted to get at really managing the congestion in the central city.
Great. Okay, I'm going to turn it over then to Chris to walk us through some thoughts on highway tolling and equity.
Right. Can you guys hear me? Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yes, we can.
All right, great. So hello, everybody. This is, my name is Chris Lepe with Mariposa Planning Solutions, and I'm very excited to be with you here today to talk about equity and pricing. And before I get started, I just kind of want to give you a little bit of an overview of the key themes that I'm going to be hitting on. The first being just a little bit of perspective, overarching perspective about equity and pricing. Secondly, getting into some examples of how our status quo, in particular in the Portland area, is inequitable. And then I'm going to share some considerations on tolling system design and tolling system outcomes, followed by some specific case studies of what some regions out there have done to advance equity within pricing and other realms. But so first, to just give a little bit of context, this is probably nothing new for those of you that have been involved with this process. I'm a huge fan of the work that y'all are doing. But you know, overall, public and private actors on the institutional and individual levels have contributed to massive wealth, health, and quality of life outcomes, divergences there, right? And, including between racial groups across the country. And our level of income inequality here in the US is unparalleled really among OECD countries. Wealth, of course, as I mentioned, is closely linked to race due to centuries of discrimination and of oppression. So these inequities persist today and are reinforced on a structural level, including in regards to the way that we plan and invest in our cities and communities, and even in the way that we penalize people through enforcement, such as fare evasion and speeding. So I'll just give one example with, not to pick on anybody here, but Jeff Bezos lives north, I believe, of where you guys are at, and is the world's richest man. And he makes, according to a quick search, $2,489 per second, or more than twice what the median US worker makes in 1 week, according to Business Insider. And so you have to ask yourself, in terms of if Jeff Bezos were to be caught speeding, why is it that Jeff Bezos, his traffic ticket would be the same as someone that that makes minimum wage? And that's just one example, right? Because what is the pain that Jeff Bezos is going to experience with that traffic ticket as opposed to someone that's making minimum wage? So we have to ask ourselves, just as that one example, just the way that our overall system in the United States penalizes the poor and those with fewest resources. And so if we're looking to shift to a more equitable system, we need to think critically, top to bottom, not just in the way that we conduct community engagement, but about the outcomes that we're seeking and the kind of reforms that are needed to get there. So and the good news is that in some ways the ground underneath us has shifted as it relates to equity. You guys in Portland are doing really forward-thinking work and are leading the charge, I believe, at the national level. You're among the good actors, if you will, the vanguard on equitable transportation planning. But we still have a long way to go, obviously, to be able to get to the equitable communities that we're seeking. So just to reinforce a little bit of Peabody and Pullum's approach, from my perspective, transportation planning must move from a do no harm approach to an approach and framing that puts equity and historically underserved and EJ communities at the center and focuses on leveraging projects, programs, and plans to the greatest extent possible to advance equity and redress these injustices. And this differs very much from the mitigation-oriented approach, which is very much about maintaining the status quo, which inherently, as noted, is inequitable. So with that, I kind of, this is sort of the framing that I bring and the context that I bring, which sounds like you guys also bring to congestion pricing and being able to leverage this as an opportunity to be able to create a more fair and equitable system. So one of the report that I'm going to be referencing, it's already been noted, that discusses Transform's perspective and approach to advancing equity through road pricing is called Pricing Roads Advancing Equity, and gives lots of case studies and examples and a roadmap of how to cut congestion while increasing fairness for the most vulnerable residents. But even before we talk about a congestion pricing charge, it's important to note the repercussions of doing nothing, right? Of maintaining the status quo, the ramifications of inaction, and all you have to do to see that is just look outside your window at the smoke-filled air and think about the ramifications that's having for our most vulnerable residents, including farm workers and service workers that don't have the option to be able to be sheltering in place. So whether it be for health, for climate, for the reliability of access to jobs, what is the ramification, what is the repercussion of not moving forward with a particular policy or project, in this case, congestion pricing? It also relates to taxation, which a lot of our taxes are regressive. And so, what is the alternative to implementing congestion pricing in terms of how we're going to pay for necessary improvements? So that all said, in terms of the context, some examples in the Portland area of how the status quo is unsustainable and inequitable include that 42% of emissions come from transportation. And in some cities, it's actually, or some areas, it's actually significantly more, but in Portland, 42%. And transportation emissions are on the rise. If you look at who is impacted by this future of greenhouse gas pollution and climate change, of course, we know that those with the fewest resources are going to be most impacted and at least able to adapt. But also another pollutant, diesel particulate matter, is 2 to 3 times higher in communities of color. So whether it be respiratory health and other impacts as a result of DPM or climate pollution, inaction carries significant risks. In regards to access to a car, 19% of Portlanders that are people of color, 19% of people of color in the Portland area don't have access to a car, 31% for Black Portland households, compared to 14% of white households. And there tends to be a greater reliance on public transit. However, since 2000, bus speeds have decreased by about 14%. So what are the impacts, the disproportionate impacts there? Average commute times are 20% longer for Black Portlanders, and low-income Portlanders spend more of their income on transportation at 25% compared to the average at 12%. One final data point is that people walking in East Portland are 2.5 times more likely to be killed in traffic crashes than the rest of the city. So some of these statistics might be well known to y'all, but I think it is worthy of restating them. In addition to these data points, another consideration is that roadway expansion is very costly. So, the primary benefits of roadway expansion are auto users and can have significant environmental and community impacts. the more money that we spend on widening, the less money there is for other sustainable and equitable transportation options. And I think that was a point that David in his presentation hit on. So I won't belabor the last point there about climate and safety risks, but certainly effectively managing demand can help with that as well. So moving on to the next slide. So some considerations to think about in regards to highway tolling and equity is affordability. You know, it's the first thing that I think comes to mind for most people when you talk about tolling a roadway facility. And some key questions to ask there are, will the proposed project make transportation more expensive for some members of vulnerable communities? And if so, by how much? And how can we design the project or the policy to make transportation more affordable, including for those communities? Also, I believe in David's presentation, he spoke about flat versus dynamic toll rates, and that dynamic toll rates have more flexibility for folks to be able to decide, for example, when to travel and thereby not pay as much. So that inherent flexibility is beneficial on an equity front. Discounts, rates, and exemptions. You can have income-based exemptions, occupancy-based exemptions, and vehicle-based exemptions, such as electric vehicle exemptions, as we have in California for our carpool express lanes. Another consideration is the availability of alternatives, which is really key, right? If you're gonna put forth a congestion pricing charge on a particular corridor, are there viable alternatives in place now that can give people a solid option to be able to get to where they need to go? But one final consideration is that with discounts, rebates, and exemptions, you know, you can pile those on. Perhaps they would be good for equity, but then if you have too many of these, then what are the implications for the effectiveness of the program overall, or the congestion pricing charge? As I'll talk a little bit later, England or London, the congestion pricing there has been, the benefits have been blunted a bit by all the exemptions that they've provided. So this chart that you see here is from the Pricing Roads Advancing Equity report, and you'll see that different kinds of pricing strategies, flat rate pricing, dynamic pricing, and means-based pricing with targeted caps and/or exemptions can lead from not so equitable and regressive to more equitable outcomes. Again, the point, part of the point here that's important to cite is status quo, perhaps being the most inequitable of the options there. So next slide, please. So some additional considerations on this end on the tolling system outcomes. So some key takeaways are that we need to have some complementary strategies when thinking about investment. So supporting other modes in terms of toll revenue investments, supporting discounts, rebates, and exemptions, and supporting infrastructure and programs to encourage low or zero emission vehicles. Also, you guys already touched on it. What are some possible revenue restrictions? And if there are restrictions, are there any ways to be able to effectively get around those restrictions, be able to kind of meet the community needs, and you know, with those restrictions in place, or you know, is there an opportunity to be able to change the rules of the road, if you will? So again, here we have an investment equity matrix from the report, Transform's report. And when we're thinking about, again, now in terms of investments, road expansion being the least equitable because most of the money, if not all of the money, is going to be soaked up from the congestion pricing charge for expansion. Or at the very least, the provision of affordable and sustainable transportation options will be likely delayed. So probably the least of the equitable options there, but you can have a mix of road expansion and transit, I think the ideal, from my perspective and that of Transform, and I think also of the city of Portland and Palm, is having investments on focused on transit, walking, and bike infrastructure and other mobility options such as carpooling and van pooling, in order to move more people with fewer cars, and doing so with a real focus on vulnerable communities. Now, whenever we talk about investment in low-income, vulnerable communities, it's also important to consider the land use and sort of gentrification displacement ramifications of those investments. So that's important to keep in mind through the planning process. Next slide, please. So just to give you a few examples, some case studies. First, with discounts, exemptions, and rebates, LA Metro provides a $25 transponder credit for residents below an income threshold. In London, I already cited London, but they have a blue badge program for drivers with disabilities, and that provides refunds for trips to hospital appointments. And they also have a discount for people living in the price areas. Again, though, the congestion reduction benefits of the London case study have been, or London example, have been a bit blunted because of those exemptions. In New York, they proposed a cap on tolls on small businesses who must use a toll facility many times a day. And so those are a few examples of kind of the affordability side of things on exemptions and rebates and discounts. In terms of mobility options, Los Angeles, and you'll see behind me, I've got the I-10 and 110 express lane image of express lane transit there. The LA Transit Rewards Program provides toll credits to transit riders for every 16 trips they take. So 16 trips on transit, you get a free toll credit on the I-10, 110. They also use in LA, they use the toll revenue to fund transit, walking, and bike projects within 3 miles of the toll facilities. So 3 miles within a toll facility, remember we're talking about, or you guys were talking a little bit about what a corridor represents. The definition of a corridor, where there they define it as 3 miles. That covers a lot of area, and so most, if not all, of the money that goes from the toll revenue after operations and funding direct transit service improvements on the corridor go to funding transit, walking, and biking projects and safety improvements at the ingress and egresses to the highways. Minnesota requires half of the remaining toll revenue to go to transit service in the corridor. And then just a couple of community health and air quality examples. LA, through the same tolling project, I-10, 110, has purchased electric buses with the revenue from the express lane tolls, and King County up north is proposing to use pricing revenue to fund zero emission bus routes as well. I'll give one final example, and this goes back to the question of speeding tickets. As I noted at the onset of the conversation with the Jeff Bezos example, in Finland, they have a means-based speeding ticket approach to where, I'll just read a quote from you from the Atlantic. Finland's system for calculating fines is relatively simple. It starts with an estimate of the amount of spending money a Finn has for one day, and then divides it by 2. The resulting number is considered a reasonable amount of spending money to deprive the offender of. Then, based on the severity of the crime, the system has rules of how many days the offender must go without the money. Going about 15 miles per hour over the speed limit gets you a multiplier of 12 days, and going 25 miles per hour over carries a 22-day multiplier. The income element, though, is rather interesting, because in 2002, to give you a sort of a counter example from the way that we do things here, in 2002, a Nokia executive was fined the equivalent of $103,000 for going 45 miles an hour in a 30 zone on his motorcycle. And then NHL player Teemu Selanne, who used to play for the San Jose Sharks, I live in San Jose, big Sharks fan, incurred a $39,000 fine 2 years earlier. That's how I first found out about it. And so anyway, just somewhat humorous when you think about it, but what is fair? Well, certainly the system we have right now is not. And in Finland, they have a very different approach. So just some final thoughts, just to kind of circle back. You know, we have these this unequal system, unequal landscape across the country, and it's our responsibility to fix it, fix what is broken, fix what is unequal and unfair. And congestion pricing, depending on how it's done, can either take us in the wrong direction, or if done in the way that I think you guys are proposing, it can lead to a more equitable transportation system. But we must lead with equity throughout all phases of the process, including strong accountability measures, which starts with selecting the right goals and indicators for a project, which you guys I know have done a great job at. I commend you for that. And does not end with the completion of the project, right? Ongoing monitoring, reporting, and changes in the project over the course of time must take place with ongoing and meaningful engagement of Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities. So with that, that concludes my presentation. I look forward to engaging with you all in a conversation about a more functional, sustainable, and equitable system and what it might look like and how congestion pricing can get us there. Thank you.
Thank you so much,
opening up
Curtis.
for questions, I believe, yeah?
We, let's take, I see Tony's hand. Let's take one question. We're quite a bit behind schedule, and I want to make sure we get into the small group. So Tony, can you ask your question? Then I'm going to turn it over to Shoshana.
Yeah, I was wondering, it's kind of two-part. One is, do we think that the Oregon Constitution would prevent cash dividends or rebates from the revenues? And I'm wondering if Chris or anyone else knows of any places that have done a system where you rebate or use some of the revenue as a dividend to low-income residents, so that then it's kind of just a general cash benefit that they can use either to offset the cost of the tolls or use for, you know, to move closer to where they work, or whatever anyone would need to, you know, like for their own transportation needs, rather than just discounting or rebating people who use the system being tolled.
Mm-hmm. I'll let others confirm, but my understanding is that that is not prevented. David or others, did you want to confirm that?
I think the common understanding of the constitutional restriction is that it would be prevented, that it, you know, it has to be for use in the right of way. So something like a direct cash to folks would be restricted.
Tony, I think just the nature of your question, this is where you get into sort of how the courts have interpreted the constitutional restriction when they're challenged, and then the willingness of asking a jurisdiction to do something that could be challenged in court to then further be defined by an Oregon judge, whether or not it would fit into the very, very narrow interpretation of the constitutional restriction, which is looking back at case law, it's been interpreted very conservatively and very narrowly. So it's what we know. And then the second question is sort of like, what are we asking the jurisdiction to do to actually push that? And is the jurisdiction willing to take on a potential challenge to that? Those are kind of like two different things.
And back to, because of all that is why we want to have a conversation about what would you all recommend, and then sort of figure out what would it take to get there. Mm-hmm. But also be really clear that there are some significant challenges.
And I'm going to use that as a segue, Shoshana, to kick it over to you for the last part of our presentation, which is sort of the city's position to date, so that we can get to discussion.
Okay, all right, well, and I will try, we are running behind, so I'll try to do this really quickly. And I guess also the last part of Tony's question, I don't know of anyone who has done that. I do believe that there was a report in Seattle last year which had some recommendations for a similar kind of a rebate. So I think there are other people thinking about it, but I don't know if anyone who's done it.
Vancouver
sort of,
as well.
Someone say something?
Oh, this was Chris. I think Vancouver is also considering it.
Great, thank you.
David, do you have anything to add?
The only thing that I would also like to add is that the context of where you give or how much is generated by the toll and then how the revenue is distributed can be different based upon individual state laws. So for example, in Los Angeles, one of the common elements under consideration is to link means testing for the toll rate with the qualification for low-income assistance programs that you often see for utilities. I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, but TriMet offers a low-income assistance program for its transit fares. A similar sort of mechanism could easily be adopted, including the same qualification process to make it even simpler for people for any type of tolling application.
Awesome, thank you for that addition. Okay, I'm gonna try to breeze through here. Just again, wanting to acknowledge and be transparent with you all that this is not the first conversation the city has had about tolling, and that we have been weighing in already to date and continue to even. You know, there are sort of policies indicated in our comprehensive plan around pricing and tolling, and specifically tolling is called out in the city's Central City 2035 plan. We were, as already mentioned, an active participation in ODOT's sort of first phase of their discussion on I-5 and I-205 tolling, called their they were calling it value pricing at that point. Vivian was also a part of it. I know a number of you were following that. And we have been to council and had conversations with council again about pricing and tolling. That's actually how we ended up setting up this committee. Council asked us to, has indicated enough interest in pricing and tolling as a tool and asked us to set it up. And then most recently, just a month or two ago, the city had a climate emergency declaration. And on the next slide, you'll see there was a clause that was part of the climate emergency declaration that said, be it further resolved that since freeway expansions disproportionately harm communities of color and increase carbon emissions, the city of Portland will require demand management implemented equitably and in close collaboration with BIPOC communities for any future freeway construction or expansion project. And this is something we want to talk about a little bit, and we'll have some time both tonight, hopefully, and in future conversations. There was some thought to, should this say will require specifically tolling as a part of a demand management strategy implemented equitably and in close collaboration with BIPOC communities, as opposed to the broader demand management, which can mean all sorts of things around creating other choices and even signal timing and things like that. So I think it is a clear question again, back to how much control do we have. It's ODOT's project, but City Council is really interested in wanting to know sort of how they continue to show up, and this is something we'd like to continue to discuss with you all. So just again, sort of going through the principles and hypotheses we have been using in coming up with our positions to date, is that, as Chris already said, as we have said a number of times, the status quo is inequitable and unsustainable, and there are all sorts of non-monetary costs that we're all paying: pollution, climate, specific economic costs, lives lost. We've been over this, but those are very real costs, and that they often hit our most vulnerable community members hardest. And as we've said, highway tolling should be evaluated for demand management before expansion, is something that we have said in some specific policies to date, again, because of the costs of expansion and benefits really focusing on those who can drive and not those who can't, and also that it is in itself a short-term fix. Then we also have been very clear that in evaluating and in designing any tolling systems, they really should be designed to advance equity, to center equity and climate and even safety goals. They should include dynamic pricing. Back as Chris talked about, a dynamic pricing has more possibilities for an equitable solution than flat rate. And that we should talk about discounts, rebates, exemptions, things like that. And finally, that the use of the revenue should really help to do all of this. It should be prioritized for improving other alternatives, non-auto transportation alternatives, to the extent allowable by law, as we have been discussing. And then, so the last thing before we break down in some small groups is there are some specific questions that we'll have you go through with your small groups. And then we also have, these are sort of some additional guiding questions, which if you have time today in your small groups, and we will sort of come back to. But I think sort of based on some of those hypotheses that we've been using so far, that, you know, the status quo is inequitable and unsustainable, a guiding question or that we're grappling with and want to hear from you all is, you know, how do we think about the sort of broader societal costs of the status quo, to climate, to health, to equity, to safety, you know, the costs of smoke impacting us all. We have some easy examples right now, and yet that is not, it is still harder to, it's a little bit harder to think about those broader costs than, you know, someone, and even someone who can't afford it or for whom it is a real burden, paying an immediate extra cost. You know, how do we sort of balance those big, broad things we are all paying for, but not in such sort of discrete, immediate, momentary ways? How do we balance those? Again, this question of, do you all agree? Should tolling really be evaluated or even implemented before highway expansion is considered or approved, things like that. And then the tolling system should be designed to advance equity. You know, what are your recommendations for designing a system that truly does advance equitable mobility? And again, we want to not pretend that the constitutional restrictions don't exist. We need to acknowledge that, and we also, I guess, sort of want to dream big. Like, what would be the recommendations that you think would make it the most equitable system possible? And I think this question of how important, you know, how important are discounts and exemptions, incentives, things like that, to that, and knowing that there are a lot of reasons they may be very important in some ways, and also if we go too broad and we start providing too many exemptions and discounts, we may mitigate the sort of overall benefits. And again, there are benefits as well, those broader benefits. And then also sort of specifically, how should we prioritize revenue? How should revenue be prioritized? And how should local stakeholders be involved sort of in an ongoing way, knowing that if you're setting up a tolling system, it's going to last for a while? So those are some guiding questions in addition to sort of using the equimobility framework, which is what we'll talk about in the discussion groups right now.
Yes, and I, with your guys' permission, am going to move us right there because we're about 15 minutes behind, and I want to make sure we have a ton of time. So if you have questions or comments on what Shoshana just shared, that's great. We're going to capture it in the small groups. So what we're going to do, and listen up to my strategy team members who are going to help facilitate, we're going to split for 45 minutes. We'll split just for 30. But what we're really going to focus in on is walking through the equitable mobility framework. We'll provide you the link so you can pull that up. Ignore the part where it says mural board. That's not going to happen. But we're really going to kind of look through the opportunities, the questions and concerns, and those revenue priorities against our framework categories. If you do that super fast and you have time, you'll get to look at those discussion questions that Shoshana just put up and have an open conversation about that too. And then we're going to come back at a little after 7:45. We'll do a quick poll and we'll debrief. So without further ado, unless someone screams and goes, wait, I need to ask something, I'm going to split us into our breakout groups. Okay, so this should be automatic. I will note for our audience members, you're going to be staying kind of with me in the main room, and it's a great time to go get a snack. And David, Ray, and Chris, you'll probably also stay with me briefly, and then I can show you how to jump into the rooms. They'll be available to answer any questions and listen in on the conversation. All right, have a good discussion, everyone. All right. Okay, I think everyone is, Eric does not appear to be in. Now Eric is in. Okay, so Ray, David, and Chris, if you are still interested in popping into breakout groups, first off, can you hear me?
Yes, just fine, just fine.
Okay, great. So at the bottom of your screen on your toolbar, you should be able to see something that says breakout groups.
That's not on mine.
No.
Yeah, not on mine either.
Okay, so I wonder if I must have to make you then a host, which I think there can only be one host. So what I'll probably have to do, which is a little less fun, but is assign you to a breakout group, and then I might reassign you kind of halfway through, or would you rather just sit in one group?
I would suggest there are 3 groups or 4 groups?
There are 4 groups.
And there are 3 of us?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would say it's probably easiest just to stay in one rather than, trying to announce ourselves entering another one.
I think
just split us up. I don't know.
I'll just split you up. Okay.
Random.
Well, and if anything comes up, feel free to Zoom chat me or text me or email me. I'll be monitoring it all, and I can.
That assumes a whole level of sophistication we may not have.
No guarantees.
As you can see, we're all kind of making this up as we go along. Okay. I am going to assign you each to a room. Have a great conversation. welcome back, folks. We'll give everyone a little bit more time to get back into the main room. Hi, everyone. Welcome back. We've got one more room that's still waiting. Okay, I think we are all back together now. And can someone give me a thumbs up if you can see my screen again? Great, okay. Well, so we're not gonna do our kind of normal go around and debrief because we only have 10 minutes left. And what I really wanna do is give us this chance to sort of sit and process everything we just talked about, which I know was fast and furious, and respond to this short poll. And then we'll do the kind of live look at the results and use that as a catalyst for any kind of final comments before we wrap up at 8. So our plan for the poll tonight is to kind of put out 3 sort of like straw man statements for you guys to react to. And I just want to say none of this is going to be set in stone. You can change your opinion from tonight until going forward. We're not voting on recommendations tonight. But we kind of want to just see where you're at on a couple of these statements that are similar or variations on those hypotheses or positions that Shoshana stated. The first is about highway toll, just the statement, highway tolling has the potential to increase equitable mobility. What do you think? The city should require implementation of highway tolling for demand management before approving highway expansion. What do you think? And then toll revenue should be prioritized towards improving equitable and sustainable non-auto options. What do you think? So I'm going to post the link to the survey into the chat. And you guys will have about 3 minutes to respond. So if anyone has any issues accessing that, let me know. But I will be here watching your responses come in, and then we'll look at the results together.
How do we access it? We just click on this link? Okay.
Yes, you just click on that link and then it should open up in a new window.
It hasn't done that so far. It's just.
Stephanie, do it. Click on the link in the chat, and not on the PowerPoint.
Oh, how stupid of me. Excuse me.
Oh, I tried it a bunch of times. So you're not alone.
I'm so embarrassed. I'm glad you can't see my red face. All right. Okay.
And I was talking on mute for 30 seconds. No, it wasn't you at all. It's our stupid slide design. It looks like you should be able to click on the slide, but you can't. So.
Well, yeah, no. Okay.
I thought Zoom just got really cool and you could do that.
There's so much about Zoom that I'm sure could do, but I just don't know.
How do I get back?
Back to Zoom. So I think once you're done, you probably have to re-find the window that we're all in, either by going to the bottom of your screen or sometimes on the side.
Oh, I don't see anything. Thank you for taking.
Oh, no.
Okay, well, I'll figure it out, even if I have to rejoin the meeting. Okay.
I clicked on the red bar. You have a red bar at the top?
No.
No.
We see you, Stephanie, so you're still here.
Oh, that's good to know. Huh. I wonder. Okay, let me just.
Maybe just close your browser unless you're in Zoom on your browser.
Mine had a done button at the bottom of the survey.
I clicked that, and it's taken me to a page that says, Check mark. Thank you for taking the survey. Powered by SurveyMonkey. Create your own free online survey now. But
so I wonder, Stephanie, if you just close out of that window.
Okay. Okay, I'm closing. Goodbye.
I wonder if we're hiding behind it. Can you see us yet?
No, I don't.
Do you see an icon on the bottom of your if you're using Windows, you may have a bar on the bottom, and there might be a Zoom icon that you can click on?
No, I'm using a Mac and there wasn't anything.
Okay.
And
I can't help you.
Wait. I'm trying to get back here. I'm going to just rejoin, see if I could just rejoin the meeting. There. I just went back and rejoined it.
Awesome.
Now I see you. Okay.
Great.
All right.
Okay, and we're having great responses. I'm going to give it like 1 more minute. Make sure we have everyone counted. Okay, last 10 seconds. All right, so I'm going to share my screen one more time. We'll take a look at these and then we'll kind of open it up for any kind of last minute reflections. I know we've had a lot of discussion and it's never enough time, so we'll definitely have more time to talk about this at the next meeting. Okay, so here we go. Can you see a bar chart? Yes, okay. So it looks like for our first sort of throw out there statement, highway tolling has the potential to increase equitable mobility. We see the majority of the folks here feeling like they strongly agree with that statement, and a couple more saying they somewhat agree, but we also do have someone who strongly disagrees with that statement. But so that's really interesting, and we can unpack that. I know there's like tons of comments waiting for us in that framework through the exercise you just did, but that's question 1. Question 2, the city should require implementation of tolling for demand management before highway expansion. I think it's a little bit different than the last one. We should have 1 more person who strongly agrees with this, and then 1 person who strongly disagrees with this statement. And then this one about revenue prioritization, it looks like a similar split, although no one disagrees with this. So the split is, everyone is on the somewhat or strongly agree that the revenue should be prioritized towards non-auto options. So
yeah, but the second one, blue, says, but possibly other things, meaning
exactly.
Auto as well.
Yes, very good point. Yep, so it's support non-auto, but other things, possibly other things as well. Very, very good point. Mm-hmm. Well, there's a lot to unpack there, and that's going to be a lot of what we talk about in our next meeting, and kind of applying a lot of these guiding questions and the themes we discussed today to some specific projects that are underway in our region. Sorry, I'm trying to figure out how to stop sharing my screen. Okay, there we go. But before we close out with our kind of remaining minutes, I just want to open it up if anyone has a reflection they want to share from their discussion or from seeing those results to kind of leave us with this evening. So feel free to raise your hand and we'll call on you. And if you're talked out, I understand. Okay, I see Sharifa's hand and then Aaron's hand.
Hi. Oh gosh, I'm flaking out. Oh, I hate it when that happens. Go on to the next person and I'll come back.
No worries at all. Aaron, take it away.
Yeah, I guess I would just say that before I knew anything about tolling and its reasons, I think I was of the opinion that I hated tolling. And just, oh my gosh, it's charging me for, what, it's like if they started charging me to surf the internet, it's just so used to it being free and all of a sudden they're charging me for it. And so I think that if this were to be a successful program of implementing tolling, education and marketing and helping the general public understand why we're using it, what its purposes are, and then helping them also just kind of really feel and see the benefits from it. Hey, your commute just got shortened by so much time, or hey, we've just decreased emissions over, like, we need to constantly be telling people the benefits of what's been going on, because I think most people at first blush hate tolling without any information whatsoever.
Okay, I'm ready.
Great, go for it, Sharifa.
Well, I at first blush was actually more in favor of tolling than I am now. And I think that is, I guess what I am curious as far as this task force goes, is that why aren't we getting opposition where you have like these pre-made videos and stuff? Why aren't we hearing from people who oppose it? And I mean, so I get this feeling that, and I think that kind of adds to my sense of like, what's going on here? And so I feel like there should be links to articles, there should be videos, there should be somebody that's invited to this group that opposes tolling. And I just think that's only fair. And not necessarily just because they're mad dog Republicans or whatever, just because they question whether it's equitable or not, and has Ashley taken the time to research it and whatever. And I just think that should be provided, as that we should be hearing that.
Yeah, I really appreciate the comment. It reminds me of one of the points that I think David makes in his presentation, and Shoshana talked to as well, that like public opinion is not like, it's not what we saw on those graphs, right? So there's that element we really need to talk about. I think the other thing I just want to say, and then I want to let my colleagues have the last word, is we wanted to make sure, particularly on this typology, to not hide what the city has said to date on tolling, because that would be kind of disingenuous to come in totally neutral, you know, there's no position. And so that's kind of why we started today with those hypotheses and got your response. But it is the charge of this group to provide, you know, unfiltered input to the city reacting to that. But I take your comments and really appreciate it. And I think that was a really interesting kind of contrast, Aaron's comment with Sharifa's comment. So I think that's a really great note for us to end on. I'll just look to, you know, Shoshana, project manager, or Noah, sponsor, if there's any final comments you want to make before we wrap up.
Okay. I guess just, I mean, I think maybe we can think about that a little bit more. I agree. I thank you for sharing. I think, you know, we're trying to be really clear about the reasons people don't like it are around affordability and sort of all the things that we're talking about. But there's also concerns with affordability and all those things without tolling. So just trying to sort of think through how to present that and have this conversation together with everyone. But we can sort of put our heads together a little bit more even before the next time, and think about how to make sure we're sharing all of the perspectives. And as Emma said, being transparent with sort of what the city has done so far. And yeah, that's all I have. And then I just also want to say one more time, just thank you all for your time tonight and for having these hard conversations with us by Zoom. So.
Thank you. Thank all of you for the work you put into it.
Yeah, thanks guys.
Our pleasure. Noah, anything? You were off mute?
Oh, no, I was just going to speak for the sincerity of the effort and the staff that's working on it. I think Sharifa, it's really good to keep us thinking about presenting the diversity of opinion. I think if we have a bias, it's that we assume that everybody hates this. So we're trying to lay out all the arguments, but the intent is certainly not to hide some other set of facts or to skew the process. So we'll just keep bringing as much as we can to it. And I really appreciate the feedback and appreciate the staff laying it all out there for everybody.
Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you all so much. I hope you have a great rest of your evening. Stay safe, stay healthy, stay in touch. I'm not going to share my screen again, but I am going to put in the chat the link to our evaluation survey. I think this worked kind of nicely last time. Folks filled it out right afterwards, and we really so appreciate your feedback. It helps us improve the meetings, and we want to hear what you thought about the pre-recording, about the memo, about the format. So if you have 30 seconds and could fill that out, it really, really helps us. But I will also let you get to your evenings, to your dinners, and thank you so much. We'll see you next month.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
you guys.
you. Bye.
Care.
Bye, everyone.